Hey, Adam. So, do millennials even need financial advisors, or can they just handle their wealth alone?
I think a lot of millennials are asking that question of themselves. And I don't think that they have too much to think about, because the reality is that they're used to a digital world that has pretty much every answer at their fingertips, right? I can remember being young myself and really questioning everything that the older individuals would tell me as a recommendation for how I might lead my life. And I'm sure we can all relate to that. But I think what's interesting about this is that if you look at some of the surveys that have come out recently and see what is actually influencing the millennial generation and even parts of the X generation, a World Economic Forum study recently came out supported by Accenture that indicated that as many as 60% of millennials are getting their influence from social media and what we call finfluencers or financial influencers. We could all question of whether they're getting good advice or not, but clearly they're having a very important impact on the decisions and, of course, maybe the pain points around financial planning that can be obviated by just getting the answer quickly. Financial advisors have long had the challenge of explaining their value proposition to an individual who doesn't have a pain point. I mean, think about it yourself. When you have a pain in your arm, that's when you go seek professional help. When you know you need to do your wills or deal with taxes, that's when you seek professional help. And I think the same thing is true for those of us that go and engage a financial advisor. When we have those pains, that's when we tend to get motivated. Great examples of that are, I need retirement planning. Retirement's on the horizon. I got to do something about it. Or kids got to go to college. I need to figure out how I'm going to pay for it. Or God forbid, I lost somebody in the family and now mortality becomes very real. So I need to go think about life insurance or estate planning. And so I think that we are driven, most of us, by an episode, an event that gives us a compelling desire to go talk to a human. And one of the things that's been really clear, and I heard Joe Duran say this in 2014, he wrote it about in Investment News. He said very accurately, I think back then, that humans, when they need to make a difficult financial decision that is both complex and has a high cost of being wrong, they want another human to come in and give them guidance, whether that's experience, whether it's credibility, whether it's expertise, or whether it's a referral from somebody that I trust. And so I think if you combine those two aspects where you need to have a pain point, an event that's driving you to take action with urgency, and then ask for a human as opposed to, let's say, digital or Google or AI help, that is something that I think we really haven't seen in the millennial population because they haven't had those events. Now, the events that I'm talking about tends to come with financial complexity. And if you think about those that are currently in retirement, typically the boomer generation, they know very well that life is getting, let's say, shorter. They're now actually dipping into their retirement assets. They are worried that they can't undo what the decisions they make today. In other words, there's a cost to being wrong. And as a result, as Joe said, they typically want another human to get validation. And so they seek advice more than ever. In fact, to that prior statistic I shared with you from the World Economic Forum, that the boomers are only influenced at about 9% are considering getting insight from social media influencers versus a financial professional. And that's really indicative of the fact that there's a higher level of trust with humans in the older generations. I think it's really interesting for us all to challenge the fact that millennials don't need financial planning. They probably do desire financial planning as they see events unfolding in their lives that necessitate a human. But what I would actually argue is that it's not so much that the millennials don't want financial planning. It's that the way they pay for it is different than the way that prior generations did. In fact, it probably turns out that hybrid pricing, subscription pricing, and fee-based or fee-only pricing will engage the younger generations who don't have the assets or accumulated net worth to justify paying a percentage of their assets, especially as many financial advisors have written off this community as basically not being economically viable to provide financial advice. So I think one of the challenges we're going to tend to see, and I'm really curious what the community thinks about this, is how are we going to engage the next generation in these advice conversations when they don't have the impending pressure of retirement on the horizon, as well as don't have the just assets to justify why I would need full-fledged financial planning.
Do next generation clients trust advisors?
There's no question that next generation clients are really skeptical about financial advisors. You've got lots of trust issues, especially coming out of college, usually in 2008 time. I think a lot of individuals lost their trust in the Madoff scandals. I think there's plenty of evidence that says that a sales-based culture, which was prolific in the financial planning and wealth management world, really, I think, turned off a good number of young individuals on the whole industry. But I think there's also some really redeeming qualities in this. And one of the things is that technology has made a lot of this, information much more accessible. I think it's still very true that professionals have to always justify their value proposition. I think there's much greater expectations. Financial professionals need to deliver more than just investment advice, because clearly investments as a commodity and accessibility and low cost is really prolific out there. You can go get index funds and exchange traded funds at very low cost today. And where planners really have an opportunity is to help people deal with a holistic view of their financial well-being. And we need to reposition, I think, the value proposition of what that verb of financial planning really means. And that will help, I think, the next generations understand the value proposition. But very similar to the way that we all question what we're paying for in professional advice, whether it's the attorney that I'm going to or the realtor that I'm using to help secure a home. There are times when we go through that process where we're thinking, gosh, I could do this myself. Why do I have to pay a percentage of the assets or the transaction cost simply to get this person's role when I can go to GPT and I can do a lot of damage? And I think the reality is that, just like I said previously, that when complicated decisions are in our face and there's a high cost of being wrong, we tend to want that insurance policy of an experienced individual who's done this before. And I think the real question about this is, how can a financial professional promote the idea that they're delivering so much value in a complicated environment for which there are interdependent decisions, that one could affect the other, and if you don't pay attention to this, this could fall apart. And I don't know that the GPT models and the direct technologies are really enabled yet enough to replace the experience that individuals who have had on the professional side bring to the table. The challenge is, and I wonder what the community thinks, is how are millennials going to really understand what that opportunity is? And how are we going to communicate it so that they recognize the value proposition?